Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guest is Marjorie Belzille. Welcome, Marjorie. Thank you for agreeing to be with us today.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Today's podcast is going to focus on the right to refuse, balancing a nurse's fiduciary duty with the right to refuse unsafe work. Who do we protect? And I want to start off today's podcast by sharing a short story from a number of years ago when I worked at WorkSafe NB. We were doing a focus group one evening in Moncton, and we were trying to learn more about our audience from the point of view of their attitudes towards health and safety. And to start the session, the facilitator asked a question to the group, and there was a group of a number of different individuals from representing different industries, organizations in the Moncton area. And she thought to warm folks up, she would ask the question is, do you have any hazards in your workplace? And the first individual she asked was a lady who was the in charge of the emergency room at the Georges Dumont Hospital. And when she was asked the question, do you have any hazards in your workplace? Her answer was, no, we don't. If you want to talk about hazards in a workplace, the gentleman sitting beside me at Petrel Seafood, you should really talk to him. Now, at that time, I was sitting beside my boss, and we heard that response, and I guess as the expression goes, we almost fell off our chairs. And we thought, imagine what would go on in an emergency room at the Georges Dumont on a Friday night. All the hazards that a nurse would encounter. And we stopped and we thought about that for a while, and we talked about it for a while, and we thought, well, why did she answer that way? And we came to the realization that probably most of her education and training over the years had focused on her care of patients. Not her care of herself, but rather how to take care of her patients. And really what we were seeing, not only at this focus group, but in a number of different interactions we were having with the healthcare profession across the province, was that a general attitude of a lot of healthcare professionals was, let's make sure we focus on and take care of our patients. And perhaps getting lost even back then in the discussion was the things that they should be doing to take care of themselves. Because again, if you can't and are not taking care of yourself as, say, a nurse or a doctor, how are you ever going to be able to take care of your patient? So when I saw and became aware of your paper, I thought, what an excellent opportunity to discuss the topic and to get your perspective on it. You start off your abstract by making the following statement. When providing care poses an almost inevitable risk of serious injury, how do nurses know where their obligation to client safety begins and their personal right to safety and security begins? And that's an excellent question. So today what we want to focus on in our podcast is you've written a document, a paper that's excellent and really gets into detail on the difficulties of coming up with an easy solution. So let's start, Marjorie, by getting you to tell us a little bit about yourself for folks that have never met you, a little bit about your background.
So hi, I've been a registered nurse actually for 39 years. I have quite an eclectic background. The first 20 years I did mostly hospital clinical nursing. I worked in critical care. I also did a little bit in the military, so different areas like that. 20 years ago I did my specialty in occupational health nursing. And for the last 20 years, I've had a major focus on health and safety, in the healthcare sector. And, of that 20 years, it's been spent in long-term care. And I actually work for a continuing care safety association right now, and we oversee the health and safety of the 70 nursing homes in New Brunswick.
So why did you end up researching and writing on this topic?
So I was taking a course at Dalhousie University. It was a graduate certificate in healthcare law for non-lawyers. And anytime I love studying, so anytime I take a course, I love to see the relevance, the impact that I could use in my practice. So working in a nursing home, in the paper I wrote, we had to streamline it to you kind of focus it in on one particular area. So I chose frontline nursing and in long-term care and in New Brunswick. So I focus it down to that. And we at our association had just developed a new musculoskeletal injury prevention program, an MSI prevention program. And so there was a lot of conversation around just what you said. Well, we're here to protect the residents. Residents are our clients in nursing homes. And the residents in a nursing home require 24-hour care. They have significant physical and cognitive disabilities, so they need a lot of care, a lot of hands-on. So we often put the needs and the safety and the care of the client or the resident ahead of our own. And we see this time and time again. And when we developed this new MSI prevention program, there was a lot of discussion on, well, if we start protecting ourselves and putting ourselves, quote unquote, above the resident, then we're not following our mission of our facility, or we're not providing dignity to the client. But that was a false way to look at things. We have to balance both equally.
So the current situation for nurses, when I go through your document, you provide your introduction, which you just really have, and a little bit of background. What's the current situation like for nurses, and how big an issue is this right now for nurses? So
in New Brunswick, for example, and my statistics are a little bit old here, but in 2021, the nursing homes in New Brunswick, about 70 of them, experienced 17,763 full-time equivalent days missed work due to injuries. So almost 18,000 days were lost just due to injury. And the other impact is that most nursing homes have on average about 15 days of sick time per year per worker. So we've got significant injury, but we also have perhaps a lot of fatigue that we're not even, those sick times could probably be when people have been overworked, when they're just exhausted, when they're feeling sore and achy, can't come into work. Not, they're not injured per se that they would be on a claim, but they're quite fatigued and unable to work also. So we have significant injury rates and sick time rates in a nursing home. And then when you take those employees out of the mix for the day, the employees that are left behind are working harder because they're often working short-staffed. And right now in New Brunswick, like most provinces, we have a shortage of healthcare workers. So it's just being compounded on top of each other.
Yeah, certainly when you look at that, the compounding effect, you wonder at times how the homes do manage to operate at all when you start to look at, the shortage of staff. Now, from a legal point of view, you have two issues here, the protection of the residents and also the protection of the nurses. And you get into quite good detail, I find, on the legalities of that as such. Do you want to just highlight for folks what are the legalities when it comes to the challenge you face as a nurse and sort of you have to care for your patients, but you also have to keep yourself safe? What were some of the issues that you talked about?
Okay, so looking at the client first, and like I say, in nursing home we call them residents. So there's several legal protections that ensure that we have safe, competent, and ethical treatment to our seniors in care. We have, if you're a registered nurse or a licensed practical nurse, we have our Nursing Act or LPN Act that tells us how we provide that competent care. We have the Nursing Home Act, and I believe there's a Healthcare Act in the acute care section. And Department of Social Development has standards and regulations, of course, also. And then the Nurses Act oversees things. And then there's a Seniors Advocate as a new body within New Brunswick who can investigate and check into things, and families can bring forward concerns. So we have lots of, rightfully so, different legislative requirements for the protection of our residents. And that is absolutely necessary because nursing is a self-regulatory body, meaning we regulate ourselves. So client protection is the number one top focus of any care provided. So when someone becomes licensed, they have to meet the standards and competencies of the profession. And that's in the interest of public safety. So, anyone that's caring for anyone vulnerable has to meet the standard of care.
So what about the rights of the worker?
So then, of course, the right of the worker, we have the legislation under the Nursing Home Act. So Section 19, of course, talks about the right to refuse. So an employee may refuse to do any act where they have reasonable grounds for believing that it's likely to endanger their health and safety or the health and safety of others. So we have WorkSafe legislation. Unions also weigh in on this, and which is a good thing. The nurses union in New Brunswick weighs in on it. CUPA unions weigh in on it. And there's also some labor laws and standards, of course, have a little bit in there too. So the unions and WorkSafe play the most significant part in ensuring worker safety in New Brunswick.
Now, you quote in your document a number of cases, different cases, relative to this issue. Were there any of those cases that really stood out to you that you read and you sort of made you ponder the difficulties, the challenges of a nurse?
One of the most interesting cases, and let me just double check my note here, was the one in Ontario. It was, let me see now, Byers versus Fiddick. It was in a nursing home in 2012. So in that case, a nurse was injured while attempting to catch a falling client, and she injured her back. So she went out on injury. And when you're out on injury, you're working towards getting better. You'll be assessed for functional ability. So your functional ability is how much work can you do at this time? How much can you lift? How much time can you stand on the floor? How many hours can you work? So you're working your way back to pre-accident ability. So this nurse was off on injury, but they were short-staffed, and the employer called her and insisted that she come back to work. And she said, I cannot come back to work because I'm not functionally able to. And the employer insisted that she come back to work, and she felt that she had to resign her job rather than show up to work or feel like she was abandoning her residence. So she felt that she had to quit her job, because if she didn't, she could be potentially disciplined by her employer and her association for failure to meeting her duties. So she quit her job, and then she sued the employer, and she was found, the decision was founded in her favor because they did not exercise the duty to accommodate up into the point of undue hardship. So it kind of highlights that when someone is hurt or injured, there is lots of protective rights there to ensure that we don't injure them further and that we have to accommodate them. But there doesn't seem to be as much concern or legislation or emphasis on preventing that injury in the first place.
So let's get into then, based on the comment you just made, there's lots of protection in theory for the patient, for the residents. There are protections under the right to refuse for the workers. But I wonder if people really realize the challenges of finding that point where you can balance both. And in your conclusions, you came up with a number of recommendations and a number of, again, still challenges that are out there that folks need to address. Do you want to talk about those?
Okay, so for decades, we've been using our bodies to move other bodies. We teach people how to do body mechanics, how to safely lift, transfer, and position residents. But we found that statistics over 35 years, and we looked at 130, one article had 130 articles that they did a 35-year meta-research on. And we're not decreasing any of our injuries. Our lost time injuries are actually becoming more frequent and more severe. So what we're doing is not working. So we need to look at how we're working and look at better practices. So one of the programs that we just developed where I work is about always using a tool whenever we're using or manipulating or moving a resident. So we need to make sure that there are tools in the workplace, and there are a lot of them out there. Scandinavia, for example, in Denmark, they have a tool that helps turn and position clients in bed, and it's with the push of a button. It's one person care, and there's zero workload or zero cumulative load on the worker. So there's lots of great tools out there. There are sit-to-stand aids. There are ceiling lifts. There are all kinds of tools, but it takes time for government or facilities or organizations to implement these tools. Also policy and recognition of what is a safe client-nurse ratio. We're very abstract about that. We'll say 3.9 hours of care per day. So in a nursing home, for example, we need to, each resident gets 3.9 hours of care per day. It's a complex formula. And then how many beds do you have? How many residents do you have? We multiply that times how many staff you need. It's over a 24-hour period. But the bulk of the workload is in the morning, perhaps in the afternoon. So there's all kinds of complexities in that. So we need to look at those things too. And just arbitrarily putting a number such as, 2.9, 3.1, wherever we want to put that number, it doesn't mean that every nursing home, every unit, every resident is the same. Some residents may require 7 hours of care. Some may require less. But when you're looking at a nursing home in New Brunswick that's a level 3, we call level 3, they require 24-hour nursing care. So that's quite complex. And it's a lot of physical manual handling. So until we get more workers in the workplace, but the problem is right now we can put the hours of care up to 7 hours of care, but we don't have the workers to go in there. So what are the other things we need to look at? We really do need to look at equipment, and we need to have staff trained in the equipment. The equipment needs to be in the workplace. That's what's going to help the staff to give competent, safe care. Sometimes people feel that it's a little bit detached from the resident when we use equipment, but it actually is much safer for the client and it's much safer for the caregiver. So it's a duality there.
Now, you had some quotes in your document that I really liked. One of them is this: there is neither direction nor clarification regarding unreasonable burden or unreasonable danger. Once again, the nurse is left alone to determine how to measure these risks.
Right. And that was that's from the Code of Ethics, from the Nurses Code of Ethics. And so it talks about 4 different things: whether there was an unreasonable burden, if there was unreasonable danger, and then the 2 other ones are, was it beyond your level of competence or was it in conflict with your moral or ethical standards? Only 2 of those, the ethical standards and competence, were addressed, but there was nothing to talk about unreasonable burden or unreasonable danger. So how do you, in the moment, quantify that when you're at work? You have a split second to decide. Excuse me. There is also in our Code of Ethics for Nurses, which is a fantastic guiding document that helps us in our practice every day to think about moral and ethical situations. And there's 5 guiding principles with some sub-questions. So about 31 questions kind of to help you guide through an ethical dilemma. However, when you have a split second to decide, am I going to do A or am I going to do B? Your body responds one way, your head is responding another way. You do not have time to go through any of those questions. You're just kind of on autopilot. It's only going to be in self-reflection and in hindsight that we're going to say, oh my goodness, yes, I should have done that, or the other way would have been better, or now I've left the resident harmed because I didn't intervene, or it could be that I've intervened and now I'm harmed because I did intervene. So it's an impossible dilemma in the split second that often a nurse has to make in those situations.
Yeah, when I read that statement, that's really the point that jumped out at me, was that it's not an easy decision. Yet you only have, as you put it, the fraction of a second to make the decision. And it can be a decision that has a major effect, not only obviously on you, as a caregiver, but also on the patient. Another quote you had in there that I'd like to get you to expand on a bit is, there's no legislative protection to manual handling, even though it is in most preventable injury. It seems that even the provincial body responsible for these protections of healthcare workers had not been successful to date in addressing the very real, often career-ending and lifelong injuries that plague the healthcare sector. What, based on your research document, what would you like to see put in place to make it safer for both the nurses and their patients and clients?
Mm-hmm. So I think we need to start at the ground level in educating even nurses. And like I say, it's been quite a while since I've been in my basic education system. But from what I understand, even now, nurses are not learning a lot about how to protect themselves, what are the risks, how to identify an ethical dilemma, and how should I respond to this. But even like, for example, in WorkSafe, they have been working with nursing homes for well over 20 years. It's been a very hard sector to kind of wrap around. I remember years ago when I worked at WorkSafe for a short while also, and I was on the committee that was overseeing the nursing homes. And the officers were reluctant in that they would say, I can't go behind the curtain. I don't know what's happening behind the curtain. And even if I went behind the curtain, I wouldn't even know if what I was looking at was safe or unsafe, if it was the standard or what's going on. So at our safety association too, we collaborate with WorkSafe New Brunswick, and we offer to come in, to help educate officers. We need to get more education out there about what does a safe situation look like when you're handling a client, and what does an unsafe situation look like when you're handling a client. So until we have really good emphasis on this, a lot of education on what safety looks like and what unsafe looks like, it's not going to change very much. There's also within WorkSafe, there's everything from smoke-free workplaces to WMIS to trenching, ventilation, asbestos. There's so many things, but there's nothing really a lot of meat in the legislation about client handling or material handling when it comes to our bodies. There is a code of practice for resident client handling, but I think it really needs to be updated, and it really needs to have an emphasis on tools and equipment. The European Union, for example, does have legislation that workers are only allowed to lift so much. And if there is a tool available, they're obligated to purchase that tool. So we have the tools, but I think we need to get a little more meat into the healthcare sector about obligating government to fund, employers to purchase, and for maybe even WorkSafe to mandate that these things are required.
Yeah, certainly when you look at the ergonomics of a workplace right now, legislation really doesn't exist. It's left up to the organization to develop their own code of practice, and that's, some folks would say that's nice, but certainly limitations to that. Perhaps one final area I'd like to have you expand on is another quote that you have in your document that refers to the fact that 73% of New Brunswick nurses identify a lack of workplace safety as among their top 5 factors negatively influencing the quality of healthcare and workplace conditions. That certainly stood out to me as well as a statement.
That was a fantastic. There was an article on the New Brunswick Nurses Union website. This was a 2021 survey that they sent out to their members. And the statistics in that article are quite startling about workplace safety. Nurses seem to have been doing more and more with less and less over the many decades. And it's really impacting retention and recruitment of all nurses. And at all levels, whether you are a registered nurse, a licensed practical nurse, or a personal support worker like on the front lines. So it's really having a negative impact. The clients we see in the nursing homes are coming to us, we call it a higher acuity, meaning that they're coming more disabled, more advanced in their disease process, or their abilities are less and less when they come to us. So the workload is increasing significantly. Whereas years ago, you might have had more of a balance of residents who were up and walking, who were ambulatory, and maybe half of them required physical assistance to get up. But now the balance is very much tipped the other way, and you could easily have 75 to 80% of your clients require physical manual handling, and very few that are up and ambulatory on their own.
Well, look, Marjorie, your document is a fantastic document. We were talking before our podcast went on air that as to feedback, have you received a lot of feedback on it yet, or have you had a chance to really distribute your document?
I've only sent it to a few friends who appreciated it quite a bit. It's funny enough, I did send it to the Canadian Nursing Association, like for an article in the magazine. But I think they wanted something like 400 words, and this is like 20 pages. So, and I didn't have the time to really shave it down. And I didn't feel that shaving it down would have the same emphasis of what it is right now. So it has not had a lot of circulation yet, but if anyone's interested, I could certainly provide it. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but it was a law paper, and we looked at the different defenses of how a nurse, if they did find themselves in a situation where that they failed to act and something were to happen to the client, that there was some damages, would they be held responsible? So the case law in Canada is not clear yet, but hopefully that with looking at new and evolving methods of caring for residents, that we can look at having a safer environment for the nurses every day.
Well, I'd like to say this to finish off our podcast, Marjorie. Back a number of years ago, I did work at WorkSafe as well as you mentioned you did. I was on the nursing home committee, very much aware of the issues that you've brought up in this document. It's an excellent document, and I really believe that you've done a very thorough job of looking at the issues, the challenges of a nurse trying to deal with patients, clients, and from both a legal point of view and also an ethical point of view. And certainly you should be sharing this document with a wide audience. So if someone were to ask to get a copy, is there an email address they could send a request to?
I do have my personal email address. They could register or request. It's mbelzille, so mbelzille consulting @hotmail.com.
Great. And if you have difficulty getting a response there, feel free as always to send an email to us at Safety Services New Brunswick, and we'll facilitate the process as well. Look, Marjorie, it's been very enjoyable talking to you today. Thank you for the good work that you've done. You present a lot of issues, and trust me, there's a lot of nurses, healthcare professionals out there who are working with these challenges every day in a very in an environment that's struggling. We hear so much about the healthcare environment, and it's a situation where they're putting themselves at risk, and risk of injury, and in some cases short term, but in other cases long term, as you put it, career ending.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's time for a culture change, and it's time, especially for the new nurses coming in, let's arm them with the education they need to work safe.
Well, look, thank you very much, Marjorie, for joining us on today's podcast. Stay safe. We'll see you next week.